Yes, sir. That's why. I was like, you said that the other day, you were like, I don't have time to get more women. I was like, I'm with you. I don't know if you on the street. Yes, that's right there.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and open it up, this presentation, and I'm gonna ask that Commissioner Mason, if he would do the prayer, Commissioner Elwood, if he would do the pledge, and then we go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Let us all bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us back to this place one more time, God, as we move forward in listening to this amazing presentation and to do the county business. We ask that you would go with us, be with us, and allow us to be able to move in the direction that you would have us to go. And we'll be forever grateful and thankful. We give you all the kingdom, honor, and the glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Legislation to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, we'll turn it to the county manager, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good evening, everyone. Today we have a presentation from Lawson Associates in coordination with our Parks and Recreation Director, Director Mass, as well as with Mr. Prime.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Sims, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Hey, about a year ago, it's been right at a year, y'all gave us permission to do a master plan, and Lowe's Design won that bid, and we've been working with them probably a good 8 months with our process. They've been kind of tying everything together the last couple of months. But I appreciate y'all giving us the opportunity to do this. I think it's going to be a great plan to look at over the next few years. And it's been a pleasure working with Aaron and his team. And Jeff's helped us a whole lot with this. So with that, Aaron's going to come and do the master plan, and he's also going to look at the south portion of the trails that y'all had asked him to add to the Yellow River Trails.
Thank you, Dwayne. Good evening, everyone. You may recall last time we presented a lot of information. This evening, now that the plan is complete, I'm going to give you a very high-level summary and then give you some focus points on near-term action items that we consider relevant for the plan. So obviously, all these are the components of the planning process that we looked at. And what I'd like to start off is, again, reminding everyone about the community profile overview and what we saw. Generally speaking, the county is growing. It's growing at a relatively rapid rate compared to your neighbors. And that growth is primarily happening more or less along the I-20 corridor. And so obviously that plays into our planning initiatives. Along that same corridor, particularly on the western end of the county, is where we have the highest density of population. So a very focused amount of people that need service in that area, particularly along the Fairview Avenue area is kind of what we generally call that region. Some of the other data points that we looked at that we've shared with you before had to do with looking at age analyses, where the older populations versus younger populations are located, what the income characteristics are across the county, as well as we always like to look at where the households are with children, the greatest densities of households with children versus lower densities of that. And all of that plays into forming some recommendations as part of our analysis for the planning process. We did go through a very good sizable public input process, and so wanted to bring up some of the highlights that came out of that process that we're identifying for you all this evening. Generally speaking, the department support from the community is very, very strong. We have a little over 3/4 of the participants that participated in our public input said that Parks and Recreation is just as important as other community services, and almost equal majority said that they efforts to improve Parks and Recreation as funding becomes available. Related to funding, about half of our participants said that they would be willing to pay more in some form or fashion in order to support that enhanced quality of Parks and Recreation here in the county. When we ask people about, okay, if you're willing to pay more, what does that look like? About 2/3 of the participants in the community said that they'd be willing to pay up to about $15 more per month per household to enhance those services for all of us. And I will show you how that translates here a little bit later on in the presentation. When we asked the community about their priorities, this is what we found. A focus on program diversification. I think I told you all before about how we're doing a very good job at addressing youth athletics, but being able to diversify beyond that to include more passive recreation, try to include some more senior programming opportunities, and also diversify our youth programming opportunities outside of athletics. The community also expressed a very strong desire to improve the quality of our existing facilities, and we're going to focus on that a little bit later on in the presentation. But there was also a strong need to develop some new facilities with a particular emphasis on a youth activity center as well as a community aquatics center in the community. The next phase of our study looked at a facility assessment and level of service analysis, basically looking at what you have, where you have, how it's functioning, and whether or not we're covering the community. So I'd like to share a little bit of information about that. First of all, we did an inventory of all of the Newton County Parks and Recreation facilities that are throughout the county, looking at what they have and the condition of them. But we also, because we have several other park and recreation providers in community city parks and the like, we also include an analysis of that to look at the total service demand for the community. And so we were able to delineate all of that and come up with some data points. One of the next things that we did is we actually mapped out all of these facilities across the community. And each facility is given a specific service criteria, whether it's a community park or neighborhood park, which has a service area radius so that we know how much of the community that facility is serving. What that allows us to do is be able to identify areas of the community where we are not getting adequate coverage. This first map shows the Newton County Recreation Department facilities only. So this is the coverage that we have. You can see that especially in the very far north part of the county, and then for parts to the south and to the east, we're really not touching anybody by our standards. And even in some places outside of Covington, we're not necessarily getting that overlap we would like to see. So this is where we added in some of the other service providers, some of our city park partners that are in the area. And you can see that we did get some additional coverage, but we're still not quite getting the overlaps and diversity of programs and facilities that we need in order to truly service our community. So with that in mind, we go through what we call a level of service analysis, which is presented here. This isn't every single type of amenity or facility that is at a park and recreation, but see, this is a good sampling of some of the more popular ones, particularly here in Newton County. And what we're able to do is come up with ratios to identify whether or not we have too much of a particular amenity or too little. The items that you see highlighted in red are some of what I call the big blocks. These are larger, more costly facilities that are generally heavily used that have severe deficiencies. And so what we did is then, using all this information between the inventory, the gap analysis, the level of service analysis, we developed facility recommendations. And one of the key first recommendations is obviously to perform those renovations and expansions of existing parks in order to improve the quality of those facilities, but also to add more facilities into those parks in order to make up that level of service deficiency. Also because we can only fit so much in our current parks, and also we just need to be able to spread our service out in order to cover up those gaps a little bit better. We had several new parks and facilities that we are recommending. A community park with a youth activity center on the western part of the county, a community aquatics facility, Spring Hill Park, which is already in the planning stages. Those were identified as high priority elements based on our community input. But also to that, as important but just not as near term, we also have recommendations for a new community park on the east side of the county as well as a new park. We call it Henderson Mill Park. It's more or less in the, it's off of Highway 36 south of the city of Covington. And also taking Factory Shoals Park back into the county's portfolio, and that will help get us the coverage and the level of service that we would desire. With those new additions, those are shown here on the map. On the background, you can see that we're getting a lot more of that coverage, that overlap that we need in the community. We have facilities. We also took a look at your staffing levels to see how they are performing compared to national standards and also just locally here in the community. Currently, we went into this at a lot of depth, so I'll kind of summarize this, but currently we have 17 full-time positions and 9 part-time positions. I believe that equals what we call a 21.5 FTE, or full-time equivalent. So if you could think about that 21.5, that'll play into these next couple of slides. When we compare to benchmark standards nationwide and also comparing to communities relative and comparable to your size, we are only staffing the Parks Department here about 38% of what these other agencies are doing. So we are definitely understaffed here as an agency. And so in order to remedy that, looking at your current operations, your current facilities, as well as looking at your new facilities and also improving reporting and efficiencies, we came up with a new organizational chart that takes us from, and my math is going to be terrible, from 21.5 FTE to, I think it's 73.5 FTE. So really ramping up that staffing. Now that's a lot to bite off all at one time, so I want to show you how we're thinking about that. Our current staffing levels are breaking down like this. In order to get us to where we need to be today with the current facilities that we have, we're recommending those additions in the near term to get us to about 56 full-time equivalents. Now, as new facilities come on and expanded programming comes on that 10-year horizon based on our recommendations, that's where we hit that top-tier benchmark of around 77.5 full-time equivalents. So that near-term goal, what I call tier 1 goals in terms of staffing, in the next 0 to 2 years or 3 years more or less, looks more like this, where we're making we're changing some roles to existing positions to give them new assignments in order to increase efficiencies, but we're also making several new hires, especially in the realm of maintenance, in order to, again, take care of what we have and improve the overall qualities of those parks. And that gets us, the goal is to hopefully get in the next several years to get us closer to that 30 full-time equivalent benchmark. That's our near-term goal. In terms of programming, we looked at what you had, and we always compare back to the Nrpa3 Pillars. These are always the 3 things that we look for. Your programming should support health and wellness, social equity, and conservation. Your programming should also be pretty diverse, and that diversity, we have this graph here shows you that, a typical agency offers about 175 programs a year, and one of the key points about that is out of that 175, on average, about 100 of those, more or less, are revenue-generating programs, so they're fee-based programs. It is important to note that these fee-based programs are enhancements to a budget for a department, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But in terms of programs, what I wanted to show you all is when we went out to the community, this grid here shows a very high-level summary of all of the different types of programs that were asked, and those are shown in gray. Now, the blue tiles are what we're currently doing. So again, this goes back to when the community said, we need to diversify and offer more programs. This is essentially what it looks like. So we have some strides to make in terms of recommendations in order to get more of those tiles switched over from gray to blue. So high priority recommendations in terms of programming is to one of the key things is to get the staffing level up so that we can expand and increase our operational hours at our facilities, because not everybody recreates just from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. They need to expand beyond that. We also want to see if we can extend those facilities, once we have that staff, seeing if we can extend those facility hours to maximize utilization of our brick and mortar facilities to get the most bang for our buck out of that. We want to develop new programs to support culture and the arts. Programs focused on natural resource and outdoor education. We have some great assets of the community, and we're not necessarily utilizing those, leveraging those facilities in order to offer these types of programs. Again, looking on what other types of programs are available that are not just athletic-based for all age groups, not just youth. And also to look at initiating new water programming in conjunction around a new community aquatics or water play facility. One of the next things that we obviously looked at is the budget for the department, what we're doing and how that compares to, again, benchmark standards. The median agencies, again, kind of the same thing. We looked at national trends across the nation, but we also narrowed it down to communities that are your same size with your same diversity of facilities. And you can kind of see the numbers here, but essentially compared to most agencies, we are significantly lower in terms of an operating budget. Median agencies, we're only operating about half that budget. Agencies our size here in Newton County, we're only funding ourselves to about 21% of what they are typically doing. So we're significantly low in that area. Another way that we look at that in terms of is we always like to compare that to population density. So this is another way that you look at the same exact numbers and the information basically comes out the same. This shows us another data point where we're still about 50% lower in terms of operating budget compared to other agencies our size. We also looked a little bit more locally in terms of some of our neighbors here in the state of Georgia and how they're operating. The only one that's a little bit outlier in terms of our data is the Fayette County, and that's because they have a maintenance department that's completely separately funded. If it was in, it would be significantly higher. But again, you look at that, we're only operating at about 50 to 2/3, or 30% to 2/3 of what these other agencies are currently operating at in terms of funding levels. One of the things that we did find that we're making a recommendation is that the budget is currently significantly higher, has a significantly high funding rate from general tax fund support. So that means that in this pie wedge of all of our typical funding sources, we're that big pie of that big yellow pie wedge is a little bit bigger than it's supposed to be. So we need to look at diversifying our income and revenue into the department in order to balance that budget source and all that. One of the best ways to look at that is that, in terms of earned revenue, again, those fee-based programs, we're about 11% lower than what a typical agency would be generating as part of that overall budget. And remember when we were talking about the community and how they'd be willing to contribute a little bit more out of their pocket in order to get better quality facilities and programs? Well, if we were to adjust everything in order to get to that level where we're matching revenue generation compared to standards, with what the residents are looking at, we're talking about somewhere between, depending on how you look at it, somewhere between $500,000 more per year to $1 million more per year in terms of revenue capture capacity that could be added into the budget and utilized to enhance the quality of parks and recreation here in Newton County. One thing that does go into the budget, there is one pie wedge that goes into capital improvement costs. And that historically has been either not funded here or very underfunded. And as a result, one of the things that we have is a very large amount of deferred maintenance at our existing facilities. Our estimates right now say that system-wide, if we were to flip a coin, turn the switch on, and fix everything and bring it up to current standards according to what the community is asking us, we're about $17 million away from having that done overnight. That may not sound too bad because nationally speaking, that's about what most all agencies carry. But when we compare it to agencies relative to our size, they're carrying a little bit less than half of that. So again, it's perfectly normal to carry deferred maintenance over, but the ratio relative to our population is a little bit higher than what we typically see. So in terms of our budget recommendations, we do want to look at prioritizing cost recovery strategies. We also want to make sure we're taking care of that capital fund wedge and putting some money into that, out of that budget into that capital funding so we don't continue to build on that deferred maintenance. Obviously, relying on alternative funding sources such as sponsorship programs, marketing initiatives for, with partnership agencies or local community business owners, as well as alternative funding sources like grants, impact fees, tax allocation districts. All of these represent a broad variety of tools that we can use in order to fund the department to the level it needs to be without necessarily relying on general tax fund, which has direct impact on our residents and communities. So building in the money, we've made some recommendations in terms of what we would like to do in order to raise the bar of service here in the community. So we developed a capital improvement plan. That capital improvement plan that you see in the report is broken up into 3 tiers. Tier 1 addresses more or less what we like to call kind of the low-hanging fruit, safety, ADA, deferred maintenance, as well as some planning initiatives for some of these newer facilities. Tier 2 is where we actually start cutting ground and hopefully starting to build some of those things, and those might not be the most expensive ones. Tier 3 is where we kind of backload the capital improvement plan, and some of those more expensive initiatives might be happening. And this is a rough breakdown of what that looks like right now. So all told, if I remember correctly, the next slide, all told, I believe we have a total of about $94 million worth of capital improvements over the next 10 years that are recommended. Now, that's a lot to swallow, so I'd like to focus in on the immediate term goals. The immediate term goals, again, are to focus on park renovation projects in order to enhance the quality of facilities, address ADA deficiencies, address security and safety concerns, as well as start developing some of those new facilities as best we can to address those level of service deficiencies. All told, our Tier 1 capital improvement plan has about almost $19 million in that Tier 1. What we're planning on doing with that, in addition to renovating some of those new parks, we want to definitely look at some planning initiatives and property acquisitions for those new parks, okay? So, again, this new community park on the west side, hopefully with a youth activity center, at the aquatics facility, at Spring Hill Park facility, those are those high priority items. So if we're going to do nothing else, those are definitely the things that we should probably be looking at and focusing on in this near term. But again, getting the planning done, looking at sites for the East Side Community Park, the Henderson Mill Road Park, Factory Shoals Park, all that sort of thing, all those things, those are also things that we should be taking as a priority in Tier 1. And I believe that is the summary for the Comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Any questions? No? If not, if it pleases the Commission, I'll be happy to pivot over to the Trails Plan and provide you a presentation on what we have done for you on that one. This presentation is more or less broken up into 2 parts. One is I'm going to do a very quick briefing on what we call, as you remember, the first part of our scope is to study the Yellow River Trail expansion, which essentially got us from Porterdale going northwards, making connections to Rockdale County as well as to the city of Oxford, and we have presented that, and I will show you a brief summary of that. But then you also came back and asked us to look at the south area, basically the rest of the county, and what that all looks like. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on those. So the initial study area basically looked at the connectivity between the northern and western portions of the county. So the primary goals were to make connections from Yellow River Park to the Georgia International Horse Park and the Earl O'Neill Sports Complex. Those are in Rockdale County, where Rockdale County is planning on bringing in greenway trails that will eventually tie into Atlanta, the Beltline, and everything else. We also wanted to make a connection over the Fairview Road, the city of Oxford. Obviously, because we're right here in the area, Turner Lake Park, City Pond Park, and also ultimately tying into what we have currently as a Cricket Frog Trail, as well as the future Cricket Frog Trail corridor. So briefly, the following slides just kind of show you some of the waypoints that we're going to be looking at, broken up into segments. This segment's basically getting us from Rockdale County down to the railroad right here north of I-20. This other segment, basically starting from that same ending point at the railroad I-20, provides that other connection going back west towards Rockdale County at the Earl O'Neill Sports Complex. We also have an opportunity in this area to have a spur trail off of the Yellow River to basically go up and around through some undeveloped areas and facilities in order to get to Richardson Street in the city of Oxford. A crossing, which will eventually get us on the other side of the river. But before we go down to Browns Bridge Road, we also have this spur trail here that is identified to get us off of the Yellow River and ultimately onto a planned sidewalk expansion project along Fairview Avenue. From Browns Bridge Road, we will continue on the east side of the river, go through a couple of private properties to eventually tie into the portion of land that is still owned as part of the Yellow River Park, and that will eventually tie us into Porterdale. Immediately off of that, we do have a spur trail that does bring us to the northeast that will tie us into the Cricket Frog Trail. So we're hitting all of our points as we go along through this corridor. And lastly, the last little segment, once we're in the city of Porterdale, we're basically planning on doing a loop around the utility easement and ultimately tying into Yellow River Park, where the rest of the trail is currently stubbed out at. Oh no, I almost forgot. How could I forget? We do have that connection as well from Browns Bridge Road to continue up to the northeast. And be able to hit Turner Lake Park, we have to do a little bit of routing around 278 and the railroad tracks, but also make our way back up to Hull Street in Oxford, which I believe will provide us with the opportunity to then extend over and be able to hit City Pond Park, and eventually also provide another spur trail connection, which will bring us down to I-20 for another connection going further south. This slide is mislabeled. Sorry. This one also is another alternate connection that we have to go from City Pond Park up Dry Indian Creek back over to the city of Oxford. So that initial study area, I believe that was presented to you. I don't have the specific amount of miles on that one, but it's between pavement, grading, bridges, boardwalks, all the like. It's about $36 million worth of trail improvements in order to provide all of that connectivity. So that was the initial study area. And next I'd like to show you the new study area that you all asked us to investigate. And again, my thanks to Newton County Trails, Dwayne, and Chester. They were all great resources in helping us kind of navigate where we wanted to get to throughout this entire study area. So obviously, starting from Yellow River Park, where we asked them where would we like to go. And so obviously, this provides us the opportunity to look at connecting to multiple county schools, look at connecting to other county parks. Could we get to Lake Varner? How can we make another touch to Rockdale and Henry counties? If we are taking on Factory Shoals Park, how are we going to be getting that? Gaither Myrtle Creek, the Charlie Elliott Wildlife Center, Bear Creek, and also how do we get from this point all the way across, maybe have another route to access the Cricket Frog Trail on the east side closer to Mansfield. So if we were to start at the existing Cricket Frog Trail, we do have an opportunity to go up some private properties as well as some utility easements in order to hit the existing east side trail. That represents about a half a mile worth of trail infrastructure at a cost of $1.1 million. From that point, it provides us the opportunity to basically go along US 78, gives us a connection over to the Alcoy, to the Alcoy River. Also provides us an opportunity to connect to New East Side, the New East Side High School. Am I calling it that correctly? Yeah. All right, thank you. Just making sure. But ultimately, this also gets us a much longer connection to be able to hit the Fowler Nature Preserve on the far eastern side of the community. That is several more miles. I think that one's pushing about 2.5 to 3 miles. That costs about $2.7 million. By the way, this also provides us an opportunity to go southward from the new high school to be able to hit some of the residential areas on the southeast part of Covington. and that is what this looks like. We're making that east to west transition from Covington out to the farm. We do have an opportunity to continue up the river corridor to eventually make that connection to Lake Varner. So we're kind of switchbacking along the river corridor a little bit before we ultimately hit a point where we'll be paralleling the existing railroad corridor before we're actually able to go underneath the trestle bridge and be able to make that connection to the trail system that is at Lake Varner. That one is again it's about 2 to 2.5 miles at a cost of about $2.1 million. We also have an opportunity to go from Cedar Shoals, which is a mixed-use to residential development in the city of Porterdale, which is kind of the terminal point of our Phase 1 planning efforts. At that point, we're going to be looking at going south to be able to tie into Spring Hill Park. So we have a lot of, this whole area right here was really easy to plan because we have a lot of water reclamation fields with some beautiful service roads. So the idea was to not invest a lot of money in heavy grading or new property acquisition. So we're basically bringing ourselves through those service roads in order to make that connection. It is important that at this point we do have one significant crossing feature to go from a utility corridor in order to cross over the Yellow River in order to get a connection on the west side of the river to Spring Hill Park. All told, that one is, again, that's probably around 1.5 to 2 miles in order to make that run. That costs about $2.7 million. While we're in this area, this also provides us to make another connection eastward to the Cricket Frog Trail. This one, again, more or less utilized as an existing route through those water reclamation fields, crossing over Highway 36, and eventually tying into that as well. This one is, again, about 2 miles at about $2.2 million. So when we are on the west side of the river, we have a very long run where we are hoping to connect from Spring Hill Park to get all the way over to Denny Dobbs Park. The vast majority of this routing is going along an existing gas easement. There are a couple of points where we have to jog around that due to some residential homes that are butting up against that on private property. But we have a pretty sizable run, almost 4 miles in order to make that run at a cost of about almost $5 million in order to connect to Denny Dobbs. Highway 20, where it crosses the river. It is important to note this isn't necessarily a terminus where Rockdale County is currently planning on bringing in a trail, but it is just another opportunity. Planning initiatives change all the time. This is an easy point connection, so Newton County Trails, as well as the rest of the county staff, we thought this would be a good opportunity to make another western connection. That one is right about 1 mile long, and it's about $1 million in order to do that. Going back to Spring Hill Park, this serves as another leg for us to immediately start running south. So here we plan on running more or less along the river corridor in order to hit the Burt Adams Boy Scouts property, where we have a couple of other splits. This one of the challenges with this corridor is we are running through a lot of floodplain and some pocket wetlands, so we do have a very high cost associated with bridges and boardwalks through this corridor. So even though it's only almost 3.5 miles long, it does have a cost of, pushing almost $10 million we're anticipating in order to make that connection. Again, that's mostly related to the bridge, to the boardwalks that'll be needed to make those spans. From Burt Adams Boy Scouts, we do have an opportunity to continue south and make another connection over, and I apologize, it says connection to Henry County. I believe it's actually Butts County that we're going to be hitting at that point. But we do have a couple of waypoints and brake stops along the way. There is a piece of property that's located in this area off the river that's owned by Georgia Power that we wanted to connect to because County Trails thought that would be a good stop for a major trailhead before we actually make that connection going back up the highway to the west towards Butts County. Again, that one is somewhere around 2.5 to 3 miles long at a cost of approximately $5 million. If we were to go back up north towards that Burt Adams Boy Scouts property, we were successful in finding a route in order to navigate east and south in order to eventually hit Factory Shoals Park. This does utilize some existing service roads that go through the Bird Adams property, but eventually does cross over and follows the Alcovy River corridor going south towards Factory Shoals. That segment is approximately, it's almost 2 miles long at a cost of about $2.3 million. Once we're at Factory Shoals, we are not too far away from Gaither Merrill Creek. One of the key things that was noted to us is, Gaither Merrill Creek is a very popular events venue, and so we want to make a good connection behind that, and it also provides us an opportunity for another trailhead for this southern portion of the Trails Network. So here we're able to navigate through Factory Shoals along the river, eventually head up northwest towards running along Bear Creek, and make that connection onto Merle Creek property where we will have that trailhead. That segment is it's about 2 miles long at a cost of $1.7 million. When we're here in the southern part of the county, we do have an opportunity to make that connection to the Charlie Elliott Wildlife Center, where we'll continue to navigate through Gaither Merrill Creek and eventually get onto a county line highway to be able to make that connection. That run is just over 1 mile long and it costs about $2.3 million. Now, if we were to continue northward and make our way to the Cricket Frog Trail on the eastern side of the county, this is what that would look like. We would essentially be routing through the Bear Creek Reservoir, and it's a little bit cumbersome because it's relatively heavy terrain in that area, as well as lots of wetlands and floodplain. But it is a feasible route. Newton County Trails is generous enough to point out several property owners have expressed interest in donating easements in this area, so this kind of drove some of the routing that we have over here. All told, this gets us almost 2 miles worth of run, including a couple of bridges that cost about $5.6 million. That hit all the major waypoints, and while we were at it, Newton County Trails said, while we were asking for the sky, could we not identify funding to just make a final little leg connection for the Cricket Frog Trail that wasn't already really identified? So we have about 1,100 linear foot run of paved trail at a cost of $175,000 in order to make that connection. So all in all, this whole Yellow River South corridor, which basically covers, I don't like to call it Yellow River South, it's basically the rest of the county trail plan, is about $44.5 million worth of investment. But it's important to note that out of that, we are getting, out of both study areas, we're adding potentially 48, almost 50 miles worth of new trailed corridors for the county. And one of the important things and one of the main drivers here is not only to enhance the local quality of life and recreation access, as well as ease of transportation, this provides us an opportunity to make those connections to our neighboring communities so we can connect to the overall Metro Atlanta trail network that is being developed by all of our partner communities. And obviously, again, the more we get people access, the more we get them out, it lends to a better, healthier community and ultimately does increase economic generation in the county.
Will equate to about $44.5 million. And I don't know if, and maybe Mr. Sims can answer this question, have we kind of started looking at, do we have any of these funds available already budgeted? If not, have we kind of start looking at how we can progressively move toward getting that $44.5 million so that we can complete this master plan? Do we have like a plan in place to get there?
Thank you for a great question. I think that was a part of the presentation today, is to bring before you all just some thoughts on how we can move our county forward, implementing plans. Trails are truly an asset to a lot of communities, and I think we might want to look at a phased approach on implementing some of the trails, as well as the previous presentation. Also, I thought it was great to kind of talk about how we can implement some of the things that they suggested in a phased approach. also, if our consultants can kind of, on a high level, let us know how some other communities have done it.
Certainly. So obviously, grants are one of the major drivers regarding trail development. T grants are constantly coming up, and most recreation providers are engaging those T grants tied with other recreation enhancement projects. One of the other ones, Gwinnett County has a great example that I'd like to share with you. Gwinnett County has excellent interdepartmental communications. So when Transportation Department is looking to, matter of fact, this happened just 2 miles from my home. Transportation Department was looking to widen the bridge, or put up a new bridge to get it up out of the new adjusted floodplain. And they basically brought it to all the other departments, we're doing this, do you see anything? Parks and Recreation said, aha, that bridge is right on a planned greenway corridor that we have. And so they entered into a mutual relationship in order to basically split the cost. Transportation did handle the bridge, but they also took up a large amount of funding associated with the greenway development or trail development that went with the sidewalk along that bridge. And it was it was almost a mile long worth of that. So Transportation Department took that on, but then Parks and Recreation was able to piggyback on that and continue the trail back over to their final termination point. So that's one collaborative effort. Working with other departments doesn't necessarily just have to be a Dwayne issue or anything like that. So that's definitely one thing. Another thing I would like to point out for you all is the numbers that we put together, is the only way we know how, is based on a bid environment. So if you were to engage a contractor in order to do this, I have learned over the last year working with Dwayne and working with Chester that you have tremendous internal resources. There are already conversations going on about executing some of these improvements internally at a significantly lower cost. And lots of communities do that. So I would encourage you, I'm kind of giving you kind of what I think is a realistic, I wouldn't call it worst case scenario, but most feasible scenario. There are plenty of opportunities to work internally is what I'm getting at, in order to get to a more realistic phased implementation approach.
Excellent. I think that's great. I love the interdepartmental agreement, and it's even more amazing to hear that we already have some of that discussion and conversation going on amongst our departments. So thank you for answering that for us.
And if I may ask, from your experience, have you seen some economic development opportunities with proposed trails?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, here in Atlanta, the big one that we all see in the paper is obviously the Beltline, right? I mean, that's a given. But others that do happen, as Jeff was just reminding me, it's kind of a two-part answer to both of your questions. One way that we could also extend that dollar is to work with developers who are identifying, who are working on properties that are along these corridors. There are already several that the county has been talking to who are in this area, who are able to help, and we can leverage those dollars. But in terms of economic activity, Mr. Sims, those developers realize that they get more interest in their properties, whether it's residential or mixed use or commercial, if it is on these greenway corridors. These workers have an opportunity at a lunch break to get out and walk in the woods in a safe environment. These residents have a way to get to their local schools or their neighboring communities without venturing onto the highway. These enhance quality of life, which attracts business, which attracts tourism, which ultimately generates revenue generation. Unfortunately, I don't have any hard numbers, but I can tell you that it is a significant economic impact.
No, there are more questions and anything. Well, I just want to just kind of just pass some. I think it was last week. I was looking at the news. I think it may have been one of the trails here in Newton County where some young lady had been attacked to a certain degree. So, during the conversation of us working on these trails, then there has to be an element of safety. I mean, if you think about the ones in Atlanta, the one they talk about all the time. Some young lady was maybe ran over, hit, or robbed, and one man was stabbed. So it's got to be an element of safety, and I think there's got to be a plan for safety with these trails that we have in Newton County. And I can remember when it was first brought up, one of the concerns of the residents in the unincorporated Newton County was they talked about the safety, and they talked about some of the, we don't want these people from Atlanta coming this way, which, you know, we can't stop that because people are going everywhere. But we have to have a safety plan at least in place. In the time that I think we have talked to Sheriff Brown, and it what it boiled down to manpower. What it boiled down to was having something that they could more men in order to patrol these trails. And factory shows, we're going to put factory shows into it, and we should. I've always been for a factory show being something really big for us recreation. In fact, I think the late B.C. Crow and I were talking about how nice would it be if we could put some type of amenity down in that part of the county for the citizens of Newton County. But we should also want to be safe. And so we've been fortunate so far this year, not even having in Town factory shows. Typically we have one every other year or one every a couple of years. So when we're putting all this together, let's bear in mind that there's got to be an element of safety, and maybe work with the sheriff, or the city Covington Police Department in Covington when we start running trails to try to at least have a plan in place as far as safety for our citizens. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I want to add to that. I was looking while he was speaking that there was an area of safety and security in this report. And it kind of talks about, of course, working with our public agencies like our Sheriff's Office, as well as support from private groups and/or adjacent property owners along the Greenway could be formed and become a major resource in both policing and maintaining the Greenway system. So this resource will have a strong bond of public ownership and will make a special effort to see that the Greenway with its built facilities and natural resources is protected and used as per city rules and regulations. So I know we're looking at our public agencies that we already have in place, helping them maybe also, this is something that I've been wanting or I'm about to start doing again, or revitalizing on the western part of the county in my district, is really looking at those neighborhood watch programs, reinstituting them, reincorporating them where you have those neighbors that may live along that Greenway that are able to be a part of those neighborhood watch programs to be able to kind of help our public agencies as well. And then if we do have to institute or implement, private security systems or private security companies that can come in and help with the policing, I think those are great things that we can incorporate while we're looking at this particular master plan. So I agree with our Vice Chair. That is definitely something that we want to look at, and I was glad to see it in the report.
Very good.
Anything else? Well, if I can, this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.